A massive shout out to the Jonin tier member Mr. Leroy 1998 and Jenin tier Leah Rov. Your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, support the channel, as well as receive special perks and access exclusive series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. Hi guys, this is the next part of What If Wendy Didn't Get Frozen in Time? Written by LastStationLover 5000, brought to you by Ray What If. I hope you enjoy. Me. But I have to do it, even though I'm scared. Can you still help, even though you're afraid? Grimacing, the brownish blonde-haired man raised his hands to scratch at his scalp fiercely. Lowering them down to his sides, he hung forward, and sighed with resignation. I can't say no to you, Wendy, he smiled weakly, raising a fist up with forced spirit. It's time I helped out too. Let's go kick these bandits in the ass. Alright, Dorenbolt said as he smiled with relief. Grab a hold. I'm going to teleport us to the one at main level. Grasping his hand, Wendy maintained a hardened look while Max placed a nervous hand on the striped shoulder of the former council agent. And with Charles placing a paw on his other shoulder, the man focused on the signature. They shimmered out of the room, appearing in the middle of the spacious hallway, leading to the throne room. There, they were greeted by a grim scene that turned Max's stomach and brought out a horrified squeak from Wendy. Armored guards were left sprawled in bloodied heaps, some twisted in odd angles while others had missing limbs or had their heads removed outright. They numbered up to 24, and the sound of fighting had yet to cease as the conflict raged around the outline of a large man while they were continuously being thrown back by the force of his counterattacks. This is, Steps, his countenance as if someone was on stilts rather than human appendages. With a humored grin on his face, he raised his hand up. Shink, and in a flash, formed a peerless blade, giving off a subtle hum as it released a majestic glow from the flat of its metallic surface. I'll need a higher caliber of weapon to deal with a dragon slayer, he rumbled out, swinging his blade to his side. In a blink of his eyes he'd suddenly see a fist rushing straight into his face. A loud crack followed up with the man bending back from the impact. Max and Wendy would look on with amazement, seeing Dorenbolt's body bend in midair, twisting around to throw a foot up at the leaning skull of the large man's skull. When the murderer turned around in spite of his bowed posture, he'd see with surprise as his target vanished, reappearing at his opposite sword-wielding flank to throw a backhanded set of knuckles into his temple. Grunting aloud in pain, he'd finally be thrown off his feet, ending with a teleporting kick straight into his crimson-coated abdomen, sending him veering off into the side of the hall with a loud crash. We don't have time to deal with this cautiously, the scarred mage announced as he dropped to his feet, his body bent over in anticipation. Go to the treasury, everyone. I'll handle this man on my own. And no, Wendy exclaimed, her aura lessening to normalcy as she saw the man she had grown close to in the past week. Come with us, I don't want to lose you too. I swear to you, Wendy, Dorenbolt looked over his shoulder, a smile formed on his face despite the current situation. I will come back to you. Then you are aware of. And I won't stand by and let you talk down to us while people in this castle are dying. Charles, Wendy spoke aloud with a awestruck smile. That was cool, I guess, Max muttered under his breath as he recomposed himself. I see I was too gentle, Eris intoned, her eyes glowering as the halo changed hues from blue to red. As a crimson light endowed itself over her body she dropped to the floor, but a sweltering heat began to be felt by everyone, her armored hands now wreathed in something akin to a molten quality of luminescence. If you don't stand down, then I shall use force to bring you to heel. Ah. Wendy recoiled, finding her body swelling up with heat and her skin feeling the sensation of being boiled. This heat, Charles gasped, finding it hard to breathe. No you don't. Eris felt her eyes widen as a column of sand erupted from the man's hands, swerving over Wendy's head and diving straight towards the elf's head. Leaping back, she avoided the blast of earth as it swept the ground with rough, coarse grains that got everywhere. Looking up, she'd see Wendy regain her countenance as the glow had dimmed on her and Max, which who, despite sweating up a storm, had his arms outstretched with either arm folded over each other. Come on, Wendy, let's team up against this pointy-eared thief, he declared, a smile formed on his face despite how his legs shook beneath himself. All right, she stammered out, finding a smile work itself onto her face at his fighting spirit. Swinging her arms around, she focused her magical energy with a swirl of light and announced her intention over Max. Fast wind that runs the heavens. Vernier. Whoa. Max felt a sudden rush of teal light swim up from his soles to push up over his bull hair in a vertical stream of energy. And now, Wendy swiveled her hands in the opposite posture, erecting another layer of golden light up over Max. Power of the stout arms that tears heaven. Arms. An enchanter. Eris marveled with wide blinking eyes. A human girl has this kind of power, at such a young age. To finish, protection of the tallest mountains, armor. Holy. Max almost swore aloud, looking down at the three-layered enchantment that now wrapped around his body. Grinning with an infused confidence thanks to Wendy's powers, he set his eyes at the awestruck elf. Bending his knees, he kicked off, moving at a swifter speed than he ever felt himself capable of performing in the past. A swirling rotation of sand formed into his palm, and he let out a voluminous shout as he thrust his arm out at Eris. Sand wave. NGH. Eris grimaced, a pale white light forming from a halo discharged in a column from her palms into a flat wall in front of herself to absorb the brunt of the impact. She saw cracks form within the field of repelling energy, making her blink widely at the attack power coming from the man. Dispelling the light, it shattered and Max jumped up to throw a kick at her that she deftly dodged, and threw a kick that he deflected with a raised arm. Ow. The beige-haired man winced out, the flash of light clashing against the three-layered enchanted aura he was sporting. Ow. The elf questioned aloud, thinking more discreetly to herself. That should have broken your arm. Take this, Max growled out as he twisted his arms around, forming a layer of sand that swirled around Eris, twisting her in the air. Then, he slammed a fist into an open palm, causing the sand to throw Eris to the ground with a sizable explosion that broke the floor, throwing the elf into a hole out of sight. Sand rebellion. That was, Charles began to say, blinking at the massive hole her beige-haired companion made. Excessive. She's probably going to not be moving for a while, Max hesitantly proclaimed, grinning nervously as he looked over his shoulder at Wendy and Charles. Let's go before she decides to get up sooner than that. Right, Wendy nodded, running up towards where Max was and, with Charlie's help, flew over the hole while Max pushed himself across the gap with a burst of his sandstorm. Once on the other side, they began to run onwards, not bothering to look down at the hole that was crafted by the male wizard. Down in the impact site, a faint white light radiated around a wincing Eris, who was face first in a comical crater of her exact shape, including her pointed ears. Pushing herself up, she endowed herself with a blue halo, clapping her armored hands together as she stumbled back to her feet. Forming a seashell construct, she placed it up over her left face's side and spoke with a concerned voice echoing to the minds of her comrades. My dears, it seems we have unexpected guests in the castle. One enchanter with blue hair and a small body, a flying cat of snow-colored fur and a blue-collared, beige-haired man wielding sand like magic. Use caution, they are extremely capable, I'm already making haste to catch up with them. Bowling around to comically impale the wall head first in front of her instead. Vibrating fiercely before slumping out of the hole and onto the ground, the blonde knight's face bruised and bloodied for all to see. Kenny, no, one of the knights shouted. You killed him. You sick bitch. Another howled with fury. Don't be absurd, Jorge remarked, huffing himself back up shakily to his feet for the second time. He still draws breath, but his consciousness is no more. That's one down, Arcadios thought with a curl of his lips, showcasing his displeasure at this. At this rate, can we truly beat them? We are left with few other options. They almost got you that time, and it was only 2 versus 1, Brutalia spoke with a sultry sigh. I think I should step in right about now. I told you to stay out of it. Runt snapped with gritted teeth and small hands, wreathed in sparking fire, held up antagonistically. Do you want me to burn you? A haughty chortle released from her throat as she fanned herself even more quickly than before. You do say the most amusing things, little one. Withdrawing his blade from the ground, the pair of women changed their expressions to one more serious as the leader of the squadron hefted his broadsword by both hands. Adopting a slight bend to the knees, weapon held low, the man's posture showing expertise as well as experience. The barking of his subordinates halted at the sheer sight of action taking place of their own superior. It is clear we cannot best them using standard tactics. We will have to use what strength we have to fully assail them from a front they can't overcome by reflexes nor magic alone, the chief of the Cherry Blossom Holy Knights Squadron proclaimed with a challenging ring to his tone. Together, men. The knights let out a united shout, their voices carrying down the hall the bandits came from. They gave skeptical stares, watching them line up and assuming stances similar to their chief. When they calmed, a countenance shifted in the air, not defined by magic but mind over matter. They weren't going to leave anything to chance. This was their strongest formation under these circumstances. "Leave this to me, Runt," Brutalia lowered her tone with her words. Runt looked objective but her eyes saw the expression behind the fan she maintained beneath her eyes, a wicked grin that bared her teeth in a chilling concealment of malice that brought her own gait to a halt. "Whatever you say," the short mage replied with a disgruntled grunt, taking a few cautious steps back. Then, the knights charged in a blur. Jorge brought his hammer to bear in a sideways swing, another knight thrust forth and two others kicked off the walls to bring their weapons down at their foe. Arcadios himself would bring a two-handed three-fold combination of uppercut and cross side-to-side strokes at her. Each strike, much to their shock, was handily deflected by the red-black dressed mage's fan. The thrusts bounced back, swords cracking and the edges that swung at her rattled intensely. Her arm was a blur, imperceptible even to the knight's eyes. "Impossible," the avian helmeted leader exclaimed. "Her speed is greater than ours." "All done?" Brutalia inquired, her fair face with cherry lips spread sinisterly. A violet aura engulfed her body as she raised her left hand with a malicious intent. As she did so, each of them were held in place, hefted off the ground, and dangled under her thrall. "I'm going to enjoy breaking you, Knights of Mercurius." Wendy had already moved on from Arcadios to the other knights, applying the requisite first aid to stabilize their conditions. "But that magic, it looks like wind pressure if you look at it." But I know it's not. I can't feel any actual vibrations in the air at all. It's something else entirely." Weaving his hands at his sides, Max formed two separate whirling twisters, surrounding each palm with a gale of earth and wind. With both palms, even as he felt his enchantments begin to fade still further, he had only moments to make this count. The beige-haired mage released a torrent of sand. It rushed along the ground, snaking its way towards Brutalia. Her fan moved in a sweeping motion, and along the arc it traveled, the sand rebellion followed, completely wrestled from Max's control. "What the hell?" Max swore, unable to help himself. "She's got him now," thought Runt, smirking. "And here I was hoping I'd get a chance to do something." Brutalia raised her fan above her head, and the stream of the sand rebellion followed her motions easily, rising high towards the ceiling. The elegant-looking woman brought her fan down, and the sand rebellion with it, delivering Max's magic right back towards him with all the ease of swatting a fly. Seeing these movements, it finally clicked in Wendy's brain. "Max, I thought it was air magic, but it isn't," she shouted. It's some sort of telekinesis." "She's right," confirmed Charles, whose vantage point afforded her the best view. "Her movements were too swift and fluid for a user of any sort of air magic. It isn't like what I've seen from Wendy." "Telekinesis?" Max was aghast, feeling the full brunt of his sand rebellion with his own body. The torrential sands pushed Max backwards, threatening to topple him over entirely. Wendy's enchantments were gone. The euphoric feeling they'd given him had faded with his last attempt at the sand rebellion. It began to rip into his skin, tearing away at his clothes. "Damn it!" Double doors of the vault. An almost electronic sound accompanied the release of the combined attack, yet it was completely drowned out by the explosion of the collision with the vault's doors. The force of the detonation sent bodies flying everywhere, unconscious knights, Arcadios, and even Wendy herself, still clutching Charles. Smoke and debris went flying high to the ceiling. Runt and Max's separate battle was disrupted, the ground shaking beneath them, throwing them both off balance. Brutalia and Eris waited with bated breath for the kicked-up dust to clear, expecting to see the vault doors blown wide open. It was to their disbelief when the door was revealed, still standing, only dented by the force of their combined assault. All of that power. And the door didn't budge. Max gasped, taking his attention away from Runt, who too looked incredulously at the double doors of the treasury vault. "It must be made of something other than steel or iron," Eris mused. "Our strength should be more than enough for metals like those." "Then we'll just give it another go," replied Brutalia. "Keep striking where we made that dent and we'll blow it wide open." "No." Brutalia and Eris' second attempt was halted by a small voice. Their attention turned to Wendy, who was beginning to stand up. Her legs trembled, and she still clutched Charles within her hands. Visions were flashing within her mind: Acnologia, Tenrō Island, the faces of her friends, wiped out in an explosion. The vision shifted. The faces of Doranbolt, Charles, and Max, her friends who were in immediate danger. Arcadios and his knights, who needed more than her first aid if they were going to make it out of here alive. Max, please get behind me. The beige-haired man wasted no time in following her instructions, dashing away from Runton towards Wendy, standing firmly behind her as instructed. Wendy inhaled deeply, pulling additional amounts of air, and the ambient Eternano Oris and Brutalia's combined attack had sent flying. Her cheeks bulged, storing the wind and Eternano within her mouth. Roar of the Sky Dragon. Expelled from Wendy's fanged mouth was a swirling vortex of air, picking up more than enough debris to be visible to the naked eye. The hurricane-like vortex ripped into the ground, bearing down on Oris and Brutalia with unprecedented force. The width of the spell was enormous, sweeping Runt, Oris, and Brutalia up within its shredding winds, and carrying them far across the treasury room, crashing into a wall at the furthest end. Wendy's roar drilled and bored into the wall, forcing it to crack and give away beneath its strength before her wind dissipated. The little dragon slayer slumped to her knees, exhausted. "Wendy, are you all right?" Max knelt down beside the worn-out girl, concern etched into every crevice of his face. The girl shook her head slowly. "We're in trouble." She could smell it. They were about to deal with new arrivals in only moments, and one of them smelled familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. When Oris sent out that distress call, "I didn't think she was actually dealing with something too serious," Wendy heard the voice before she saw its owner. The individual walked out of the darkened hallway, followed at arm's length by another person. Both were odd, though the situation at hand was hardly the time to appreciate such things. The first person was a younger individual, with an androgynous, beautiful face and a body curved in a way that would make Runt envious. They wore a sleeveless, skin-tight outfit which hugged their body, and was covered front to back with a long, flowing cloth. Their footsteps were accompanied by the click of the heels they wore, and adorning their sapphire-colored hair was a stereotypical witch's hat. Their gloved hands clutched at a staff, ornately crafting, appearing more like ice than metal or wood. "It does appear that they've given Oris, Runt, and Brutalia a run for their money," spoke the other. This one was clearly a woman, stunningly beautiful, putting even Eris Elven looks to shame. Her body was mature, voluptuous, and each step caused her considerable endowments to move. She wore only a purple string bikini, in addition to a white cloth which was draped from her shoulders to her hips, yet still managed to cover little. She ran one hand through her blonde hair, which was tied into a ponytail, while her other hand clutched a staff of her own. The blue-hued individual placed their free hand coyly on their hips and smirked. "It's you, isn't it? The enchantress with the small body and blue hair." Wendy swallowed, the hairs on her neck standing on end. Their magical aura, even at this stage, was making it hard for her to take in what little air she hadn't used for her previous spell. After the pregnant pause became almost unbearable, she nodded, clutching Charles tightly to her chest while Max looked on apprehensively behind her. "I see you're at the end of your rope, little enchanter," the blue-haired figure spoke, a smile curling at the lips and a free hand pulling at the lip of the hat's brim. A blue stare locked onto Wendy's brown orbs, the voice bringing a pit that deepens into her stomach. "I'm the generous Robin. A pleasure to meet you, survivor of fairy tale, Wendy Marvell." Certain salamander was running rampant in a port town due to a charlatan masquerading as him. "Do you know who had to pay for the damages? Not fairy tale, but the kingdom, and where does the coin come in to pay on behalf of the kingdom? So you think stealing our country's wealth will make it better?" Wendy asked incredulously. "As someone part of the problem for common folk, I don't see how you could understand, let alone empathize with the plight of people you consider beneath you," the hoodlum leader sneered stoically. "Every kingdom I go, you people are treated like you're the vaunted rulers of the land. How much collateral do you leave behind, damaged and in pieces for ordinary people to clean up? Has your guild, the most notoriously destructive force in this country, ever once feel sorry for the craters you leave in towns, the earth you leave scorched, or the people's homes you decimate?" "It happens, though," Max lamely replied, looking a bit more sullen as he grasped where the bandits' anger stemmed from. "We fight bad guys, and sometimes things break. I'm sure that is a worthy explanation for the people you've made homeless or lives you ruined through your entitled rampages," the generous Robin snarled with a dismissive swing of his unarmed, gloved hand. "Congratulations for feeling bad way too late. Damn Brutalia. You should. Lay off. The fatty foods." Runt wheezed, straining the posh-dressed woman over one shoulder. Grasping Oris' underarm, She was relieved that the elven woman felt like a pillow of weight in comparisons. Got 'em both. You almost do. Time froze for Runt. One instant she saw nothing but the fluttering of the generous Robin's luscious teal-colored locks. The next she bore witness to a reddish-orange striped blur of an outline, swinging a fist straight towards the hoodlum's leader. Robin. Runt's cry came a second too late, but her voice stopping mid-sentence was all the warning he needed. Robin's eyes dilated to pins, bending his head back, and twirling on the backs of his heels. A subsequent series of shimmers followed, sparks flying as Robin disengaged his hat's suction and placed it on his head, twirling his stave around to discharge a storm of icicles at the silhouette. You move quite well in heels. A voice sounded behind the effeminate boy, his eyes registering the impact of his ice magic impaling the far wall of the treasury. Looking slowly over his shoulder, he'd see a scarred man, wearing a flared collar-attached jacket with sleeves torn off and covered in blood. With sharp dark eyes glaring ahead, the man held a dangerous countenance despite his injured condition, one that made the generous Robin stand alert before him. D. Dorenbolt, Wendy cried out with relief. Boy, are we glad to see you, Max admitted with a weary, wincing grin. Sorry it took me so long, he confessed, and smiled gingerly at Wendy, placing a hand on her head with a comforting pat. I gave you my word, though. I intend to honor what I say. She couldn't even say, thanks. The cobalt-haired girl began to choke out sobs, eyes overflowing with salty water, as the uncertainty and powerlessness she felt was washed away by his mere arrival. As she tried to rein in her emotions, the sound of the blonde woman's breasts jiggling reminded them that they weren't alone and the moment of respite was spent. Where did he come from? Bobby inquired, her voice tinged with intrigue and no longer disinterested like before. He has a different look to him compared to the other two. I saw him with the other two earlier in town, Runt announced, her eyes fixed on the man with alarm with how quickly he moved. I didn't think he was a fairy tale mage too. You must be the other Robin's hoodlums, Dorenbolt intoned, his eyes stealing in its glare at the three. Gazing at Robin himself, he choked back a short at his choice outfit and maintained a stoic demeanor. Are you the generous Robin? In the flesh, he replied, a grin forming on his cherub face. You're quite nimble for a less than buff guy. I'd rate you a 6 out of 10 by my tastes, nice teleportation magic too. 6 out of 10, Dorenbolt repeated blinked owlishly. Just out of curiosity, the generous Robin inquired, his blue gems for eyes sparkled with intrigue. Who were you fighting earlier, to get those kinds of wounds? Handsome, actually, Dorenbolt casually replied, a smile playing at his own face. He was a tough one, but I managed to dispose of him. Bobby's and Robin's eyes widened at the implication. Handsome was a powerful mage and physically near indestructible. To have someone defeat him in single combat was unthinkable. And given the circumstances, they had no way of finding out for themselves what befell their comrade. I see, Robin replied with a more cagey expression. And now that he's out of the way, you want to take care of us too. It may come to that, Dorenbolt stated with a grim smile. However, even if I fail, you have bigger concerns than us. I just got in touch with the Magic Council, they're going to intervene in this matter, personally. At that, the air became pregnant with silence. Even the hoodlum's leader became disturbingly quiet. It was odd how, until now, they hadn't attracted that kind of attention despite then affecting multiple nations' worth of treasury. And now their bold attack on Mercurius Castle was the last straw would be the final straw, if he was truthful. Say I believe you, Robin inquired with a level stare challenging Dorenbolt's. You expect us to stop part way to completing? You're willing to sacrifice yourself to another unfeeling bureaucracy of cold authority? Say what you will about what you believe. I promise you this, Dorenbolt snarled, raising his bloodied arms up in a threatening posture while shouting aloud. My body is a weapon and shield. I will gladly use it in exchange to stop your heinous plans. So if you continue, be prepared to fight to the bitter end, and make sure you will have no regrets before I end you. It was enough of a declaration that Bobby's cool countenance became incensed. Veins throbbed along her head and the back of her hands as she grasped the pole handle of her staff. Her curve swayed as she walked forward, her body becoming alight in a shroud of pale magical energy as wide eyes glare at Dorenbolt. But, a gloved hand raised up, stifling her approach. We aren't in any shape to handle the Council's forces after fighting someone with such resolve like you, the generous Robin admitted. I'll withdraw from this, if only for my comrades' sakes. Consider this a one-time mercy from the generous Robin and be thankful that I don't kill without reason. Be thankful I don't attack without reason either, hoodlums, Dorenbolt replied with an even glare. Lest I scatter you all to the four winds of fury and beyond. A musical laugh was all that he got in response to his comeback. Strutting out as stylishly as he entered, his buxom partner followed suite and runt behind with her colleagues held under and over her arms. After seconds turned to minutes, Dorenbolt could sense they had finally left the castle. They were finally safe. Dorenbolt forced his body to stay upright until he was 100% sure that Robin and his hoodlums were indeed gone. When he could no longer sense their magical energy, the young man felt his knees buckle, and he fell backwards into the embrace of a Wendy Marvell who caught him. She too sunk to the ground, allowing Dorenbolt to rest his head in her lap. The diminutive dragon slayer, keeping a firm hand on her unconscious Exceed partner, breathed a prolonged sigh of relief. We're safe, she exhaled, her body shaking even as she placed a small hand on Dorenbolt's head. Wendy hadn't had time to truly take in just how battered Dorenbolt was. As clever as his escape was, that handsome had still done a number on him. But he was alive. You kept your promise, Dorenbolt. You came back to me. The tears didn't flow nearly as freely this time, but Wendy's eyes began to water nevertheless. Dorenbolt smiled. An exhausted, weary smile, but a pleasant smile still, and raised a tired arm to Wendy's face, wiping the tears away. I made you a promise, of course I kept it. I'm not leaving you. Max, tired as he was, couldn't help but feel like he was intruding at the sick bed of someone else's family, and said nothing for a long time. He was pleased, however, that they'd made it out of this alive. Even if their mission had been unsuccessful. We were completely outmatched. He hung his head in shame, his sandy hair drooping and obscuring his face. All of them used such strange magic. His mind drifted to Runt. If this hadn't been a life and death situation, he'd have been forced to admit she was very cute, if a bit small. But her magic stumped him the most. His hand rested on the cuts and abrasions his body carried from her. Fire that cuts the body, if only Natsu were here. A slight tension rose in the group at the mention of Natsu's name. Eyes briefly fell on Wendy, but she wasn't crying anymore. Perhaps she'd shed all her tears for the day, or perhaps Dorenbolt's words had steeled her young heart. The little dragon slayer's face betrayed only the slightest flicker of emotion, but she nodded. We're beaten, but I don't think it's because we were weaker. She truly didn't believe it was. She knew her friends were strong. But something about these opponents was strange. As much as I wanted to complete this mission for Fairy Tail, we won't have to deal with them at all if the Magic Council is coming to deal with it, Max suggested, still more crestfallen. Fairy Tail didn't get along well with the council on principle, and this in part lent itself to his distrust of Dorenbolt, and it was with grudging acceptance he realized he felt relieved they'd be getting some help. About that, Dorenbolt chuckled weakly. I bluffed them out. I've retired from the Magic Council. I am a Fairy Tail mage now. I have no more authority than you do to bring the council here. You're kidding, Max's mouth was wide, and then he grinned in spite of himself. Your bluff worked better than mine, then. Looks like we're still the only ones on hand for this. Honestly, we drew a bad lot, replied Dorenbolt from Wendy's lap. But, I'm familiar, at least roughly, with the combat strengths of these mages. Max's eyes widened, and Wendy gasped. Both of them had their eyes firmly on the man, who was looking none too impressive with his damaged body and prone position on the lap of the young dragon slayer, yet he carried the information vitally necessary to completing their mission. Yeah, Dorenbolt's words were cut off by a splutter of blood and violent coughing. He spasmed viciously on Wendy's lap, spitting up blood again, before he lay still. Wendy felt her body slammed by a sudden chill. Dorenbolt was not moving. On her lap and in her arm lay two wounded and unconscious comrades, Wendy only able to watch in horror. Dorenbolt's name escaped her mouth in a hair-raising shriek. Second lowest ranking is the C ranking. Individuals in lower-tier dark guilds would typically fall under this rank, and have branched out to more severe crimes. A third finger. B rank individuals have numerous crimes attributed to their name, wield powerful magic, would be the threats that the Magic Council's Rune Knights are at least considered for dealing with. A fourth finger. A rank criminals are among the most dangerous. Members of the Balam Alliance are typically blanketed under this ranking, and they command arcane magics, and possess very high bounties. A fifth finger. There's another ranking above, A? Max asked hoarsely. He was unfamiliar with the bounty and ranking system on principle. Mages did not take jobs directly from the council, while they did answer to them. Dorenbolt was divulging information that would typically be used by the Rune Knights or black market bounty hunters. Ranked criminals are the highest ranking we have, Dorenbolt explained grimly. This ranking encompasses mages who do not fit the A rank classification, due to their potential to destabilize magical society as a whole. The members of the Grimoire Heart Guild, for example, consisted of a multitude of rank threats. Only Ultir and Hades himself were truly considered ranked criminals. The generous Robin has gathered under his banner criminals who are all B rank or higher. That is the kind of organization we're dealing with. Max found himself at a loss. Surface, deflecting attacks from outside her peripheral vision, among other impossible feats. Jennifer Belias, codenamed Brutalia, was originally a member of the Watchful Seer Guild in Bosco. She earned her infamy through the mass murder of several hundred hypnotized civilians simply to undermine the hypnotist who was controlling them. Jennifer is the daughter of a noble family who also hails from Bosco. Her family has been pleading, futilely, for the young woman to return home. Her bounty is 10 million jewels, and she is classified as a rank threat. And she uses telekinesis, supplied Wendy, trying her hardest not to flinch at the fact that they were going up against an organization with at least 2 people who saw murder as a means to an end. She is a very skilled user of telekinetic magic, not a Dorenbolt. It is her only known magical skill, but she is able to use it for defense, attack, and supplementary purposes. Eris Vithis, who freely uses her real name, is a non-human member of the Robin Hoodlums. She is an elf from the 7 allied nation state of 7, and has a reputation as an outspoken detractor to the worship of pagan deities, specifically deities that date back before the decline of the original gods and dragons. Eris is wanted for slaying multiple civilians she claimed to be cultists, and is currently on the run from her own people. Her bounty is 15 million jewels, and she is classified as a rank threat. So she actually wasn't human, noted Wendy. But she killed people because they were cultists. There's something odd about that. The young dragon slayer had felt like Eris would have been one of the least likely to kill, at least among their opponents. Even when Eris had fought Wendy, Charles, and Max, her attacks had felt like they were meant to incapacitate, not kill. Do we know anything about her magic? Inquired Max. Yes, but what I can tell you won't help us, admitted Dorenbolt. Her magic is a very rare form of light magic, referred to as the kaleidoscope. It gives her a wide array of abilities based on the color of the light in question. As for which color corresponds to what ability, I couldn't tell you. Users of the kaleidoscope magic are far and few between, and knowledge of it in the council is limited. Bobby Blondes, another member who uses her real name without much fear of the council's eyes and ears. Little is known about her past, and she operates typically as a hired sword, and as such, she has chosen to work for mercenary guilds, until she was recruited by the Robin Hoodlums. Her bounty is 11 million jewels, and she is also classified as a rank threat. Allegedly, she uses some form of requip, but the type isn't known, meaning it's most likely an obscure branch. Requip, just like Urza. Wendy realized with a pang in her heart. Max and Dorenbolt gave her a moment of silence, but Wendy motioned for Dorenbolt to continue, and so he did. Now for the most problematic of the lot. The Generous Robin. Their real name is unknown, and all those who do encounter the Generous Robin are unsure if they're even a male or a female. They're known to be idealistic and impulsive, but their strength is real. They're the head of the Robin Hoodlums, responsible for leading their multiple other heists in countries besides this one. Their bounty is 100 million jewels, and is classified as an S-rank threat. We believe the Generous Robin's power stems from his staff, making the ice-type magic he uses a powerful sort of holder magic. A prolonged silence followed Dorenbolt's explanations. Wendy, Max, and Dorenbolt shared glances that held the same meaning. This information, while useful and interesting, had only put them slightly above where they had been minutes before. The Robin Hoodlums were a carefully chosen selection of mages. The Generous Robin, much to Wendy's chagrin, had his comrades well chosen. There had to be something else they could do to prepare for this. After listening to all of that, it certainly doesn't boost my confidence, Max confessed, defeated. We barely made a good showing against them before, and now we're going to have to do it all over again. I think we have a chance, said Wendy, her words taking both Max and Dorenbolt aback. When we fought them before, we were caught off guard, right? So we should turn the tables. We're the ones ambushing them, we'll have the advantage this time. And after all, we don't need to beat them, we just need to get what they stole, and I know how we can do it in a single move. You know how? The beige-haired sand mage was unable to keep the tone of surprise out of his voice. Wendy nodded, smiling widely. He tipped his hand just a little, I think. I'll explain everything once we've worked out when we're going to make our move, but we can do this, especially if we avoid direct combat. But how can we find them? Dorenbolt asked the obvious question. Crocus is the capital city of Fiori, over 1 million people live here. Assuming for even a second that the Robin Hoodlums are based here, this won't be like searching for a needle in a haystack, this'll be searching for a very specific piece of hay in a haystack. At this, Wendy smiled more broadly, and she pointed at her own face. The generous Robin, he has a very specific scent. I'm still not sure where I've picked it up before, but it stands out from regular humans. Her body trembled, a mixture of nerves, and even a little bit of excitement at the prospect of being able to complete their mission for Fairy Tale. I think Natsu would say, at a time like this, don't underestimate a dragon's nose. Gee, I haven't noticed, Runt sighed, looking over at a wiry thin silhouette that hadn't been visible till just now. She graced a smile on her childish face, the woman looking up at the man who had sunken cheeks, dark circles around the eyes but bright blue eyes that defied the long unkempt mane of black hair surrounding his oblong crown. Wearing a tattered cloak with an unfastened suit jacket with a red tie within, he leaned down to sit beside her as his pale long fingers shook in a united clasp grip. Leaning her orange blonde-haired head to the side, she gestured with her head while whispering to the man. You feeling all right? I'm still trembling, the man stuttered with admission, nodding his head with a sheepish smile. I'm still not all really comfortable, even with them, why they scare me. They're just overgrown children, the disproportionately sized woman sighed aloud, leaning back on her hands and looking up at the clouds passing overhead of the mountainside they were camped upon. We were playing it way too safe for years. I'm just amazed that we got this far without having setbacks like this, still not fun to have, but I can see it for what it is. I'm just happy you're okay, what was that? She questioned, faintly hearing what he said but not quite sure she truly heard it. I'm just glad we made it out all right, he readjusted, forcing a smile as his eyes squinted shut towards her. If I lost any of my comrades now, I don't know what I would have done with them myself. You won't get rid of me that easily, Mirror, she replied with a wink, nudging him with a playful push of her knuckled hand. As long as we're together, nothing will take us down. At Runt's wincing visage, go on, grovel, I want to hear that little mouth of yours beg me to make it stop. Hey, she grinned past her grimace, bringing a look of confusion on Brutalia's gaze. Is that all you got? You hit like you're half my size. A sudden jerk brought her to be face first in the earth, grounded in a telekinetic pull to skid straight towards her skirted front. A heel rose up and slammed into her head, grinding painfully against her crown as she was splayed helplessly beneath her foot. That insolence isn't at all becoming of you, Runt, she murmured with curl of her lips, eyes widening with sadistic glee. It seems more punishment is required to tame that wild sense of disrespect of yours. Stop this madness, Aris cried out, her hands swinging out with a look of dread on her face. She doesn't deserve this. I disagree, Brutalia snorted. In fact, this has been a long time coming. Her smart mouth has to be dumbed down, and the only way is to rid her of that foolish notion of false pride. Can anyone see a problem with this? The elven mage turned around, asking the crowd of spectating hoodlums with a mixture of intrigue and fear on their faces. With no sign of Mirror, she looked to the squinting gaze of Handsome, and called out to him with an outstretched hand. Handsome, there is no honor in beating someone weaker than you, nor there is sport in watching this. Will you stand by and watch a comrade of yours be brutalized in such a horrid display? Know about them, but I am above such petty contrivances, and you have the audacity to limit myself on what I can or cannot do when we are robbing people. That's right, Handsome bellowed, swinging a hand as he shouted across the distance towards his young leader. You scolded me on blood I spilled but I have no memory of, but on events before, you keep denying me what I find pleasure in. We are not an order of chivalrous heroes, we are bandits. In that moment, they felt a palpable wave of energy fill the air. Space warped, straining with the feeling of a chilling pressure that wore down upon them. A translucent blue aura exuded off the long-haired back, over the thin-robed chest and down to the heeled feet. More so, his eyes held a contracted glare that poised towards the pair, his mouth pulled into a thin-lipped sneer. "I know you are both scum, Handsome and Brutalia," he snarled, his eyes looking back and forth to the pair as they looked visibly fearful at his projection of power. "But you are useful to me, which is why I've tolerated your actions thus far. But this," he pointed a gloved hand at the ground-planted runt, retaining blood and dirt all across her small body, as he gestured right back up at Brutalia, "is inexcusable. If you wish for payment, it will come, and it will be soon. Harming your comrades, however, is warranting of punishment. You dare," Brutalia seethed, a blood-red aura venting out of her body as she raised her voice into a shrill tone. "Threaten me." A sudden crack followed up with the red-black dressed woman thrown off her feet. A thick slab of ice, drilling into her chest threw her across the campsite, with everyone watching Agape as she'd slam into a boulder hard enough to smash it into bits. Hacking up bile, the dirty blonde mage tried to right herself up, only to have a series of smaller fist-sized balls of frozen water slam into her repeatedly, faster than she could even focus her magic upon. After 30 seconds of unmitigated strikes, the barrage stopped and the woman fell to her hands and knees, spewing blood before weakly looking up at the pointed hat outline of Robin's person. Her eyes looked to the stave as it lowered to his side in a tight-gloved grip, before he turned his back to her and began to walk over towards Aris, with Brutalia rolling her eyes as she passed out from the pain. "Does anyone else have a problem with how I run things?" Robin inquired, his cold gaze stretching around at the silent group of thieves that made up his band of hoodlums. Sighing, he looked to Bobby, and spoke in a low whisper. The buxom woman nodded and began to strut over, having a quiet conversation with Handsome that brought the man's countenance to a look of fear and submission. Once she was done, she turned to walk over to Brutalia, picking her up by the scruff of her neck and dragging her across the ground in an undignified sprawl across the camp. All the meanwhile, Aris had projected a healing light over Runt, while a disc of gold emanated behind her head. I'm sorry," she apologized, mostly to the small woman, and also the watching generous Robin. "This is my fault. I tried to give comfort for someone who desired none. And when Runt tried to step in on my behalf, Brutalia beat her, to make herself feel better. I thought if I tried to stop her, that would cause division, and with someone as powerful as her I didn't know if I could." "Stop," Robin intoned, kneeling down to place a gloved hand on her shoulder. As her pink eyes rose to meet his, he smiled softly at her, if not sadly. "I understand. I appreciate your restraint, but next time any of them are attacking each other, do step in. I won't blame you for what happens afterwards. All right." "Why yes," she nodded with affirmation, grateful he was so kind to her despite feeling guilty for all of this. "I've done some checking out," the effeminate ice holder mage announced to Aris, looking to Bobby as she unceremoniously tossed Brutalia next to Runt. "I wager we have about 2/3 or half of the royal treasury of Fury in our possession. Thanks to Bobby, I've also learned that, while some officials have been contacted, there aren't any signs of the council sending in rune knights like we were expecting." "So he lied after all," Bobby intoned stonily. "It would seem so," Robin smirked, twirling his stave around with a hand reaching up to brush past one of his cobalt-jeweled earrings that dangled from his earlobes. "It makes no difference. They were all in pretty bad shape when we left them, and without a healer like Aris, it'll take some time for them to fully recover. It's unlikely they'll follow our trail before we're already exiting this land to the next one." "To Minstrel, then?" Aris inquired, her attention returning back to Runt as she turned her over to finish her healing on the small woman. "You do realize there's no kings for us to plunder their riches, right?" "Patience, Aris, and you'll see what I'm aiming for in due time," he chided with toothy smile. "This is to help all of the unfortunate people of Ishgar held ransom by their monarchies. And with you and everyone else at my side, that dream of mine will be made into reality." "Not everyone seems happy of being kept in the dark," the elf warned with a worried look on her face, looking over to Brutalia hesitantly before beginning to mend the wounds she sustained not but a few minutes ago. "Case in point. It doesn't matter what the barbarians think," Robin shook his head, crossing his arms over his curvaceous chest. "As long as they toe the line, they could think the sky is the ground for all I care. This offense won't be repeated, though. If either of them step out of line again, they can fend for themselves and see how long they have that attitude of theirs with a larger bounty on their heads than they previously had. I just hope it doesn't come to that, the pink-haired enchanter confessed, biting her lower lip and closing her eyes as images of pain and blood filled her memory. I don't want to be responsible for more suffering. I can't think of that right now. Well, once we leave this country, we won't have to worry about that, Robin told her with a smile. Standing upright, he walked to the center of the camp and declared aloud. As for the rest of you, I know many of you are weary after such a long time without any reward, unlike in the past. But I assure you, once we rest for another couple of nights, we will leave this country behind and have the worth of our loot be accounted for. Everyone will be justly rewarded, in more ways than one. We're almost to the end, and for that, you have my thanks, my hoodlums. A round of neutral applause was had. Yes, they were satiated by his usual charisma, but there was no true vigor behind it. The events that happened here had left a foul taste in everyone's mouths. How long could they stay united under promises without real prizes held in their hands? Just a little longer, the generous Robin thought, looking back at Crocus with a distant stare. And I'll free the people of their king-cursed misery, once and for all. Wendy and Max filed into the hospital wing, passing by healers who were exiting at the same time as they entered. The beds were still full of Arcadio's men, though Arcadios himself was already fully healed. He attributed his recovery in confidence to Team Wendy as a result of the jade amulet he wore, a gift from Princess Hisui herself. It had powerful protective qualities, and lessened the damage he would normally take to less than half. In addition, simply wearing it sped up his recuperative powers. With Arcadios released, now back in the service of Her Highness, only Dorenbolt and Charles remained as patients Wendy and Max recognized personally. Charles lay unconscious, still, a special lacrima hovering over her body to keep her functions operating properly. Dorenbolt was sitting up, removing the bandages with the permission of the head healer. Seeing Wendy and Max enter the room, the young man offered his comrades a weak smile. Good morning. Morning. I'm back, Dorenbolt. Max stepped in front of Wendy, walking over to Dorenbolt. The former Rune Knight's face brimmed with a mixture of restrained hostility and confusion, evidently taking Max's sudden approach as an aggressive move. The two stared at each other in silence, and Wendy felt immediate worry, glancing back and forth at the both of them. As she was about to speak, Max extended a hand to Dorenbolt. Dorenbolt, surprised, looked from Max's hand to Max himself, confused. We got off on the wrong foot when we started this mission, Dorenbolt, Max said, his voice loud and clear. I was suspicious of you at first, but I want to say it again, as I said it yesterday. You've more than proven yourself as one of us. So officially, welcome to Fairy Tale. The scarred man was stunned. He had expected to be given a begrudging acceptance, or even more standoffish attitude towards him. But, in just a short amount of time, their actions in cooperating together had led the two down similar perils. He had thought the man indecisive and a bit of a coward who was guilted into acting on Wendy's behalf. But after seeing his wounds and how he's taken time after time to stand up to her when even he was at a loss for what to say. Tears welled up in his eyes as a smile broke across his normally stoic mask of a face. Wiping his face with a sleeve, he stretched a hand out and gripped Max's hand firmly, shaking it as he looked more seriously at the man, despite feeling overwhelmed. Thank you, Max. I am sorry for doubting you, as well, but you've more than proven that you really are a mage of Fairy Tale. Wendy didn't know how to process this. We're all boys like this. She didn't dare to think. Sighing, the little dragon slayer smiled with a slight weariness. I'm happy for you too, please, continue to get along in the future. Both men nodded at Wendy, breaking apart their handshake and smiling sheepishly at the girl's expression. It seemed they'd caused her some slight trouble. The awkward silence created by the newfound bond between Dorenbolt and Mest was broken, almost mercifully, by one of the royal guardsmen, who entered the hospital wing to inform Team Wendy that, as the bulk of their team had now recovered, Princess Hisui was requesting an audience with them. Wendy, Max, and Dorenbolt exchanged glances. The trio had specifically been avoiding debriefing the princess of the entire situation over the course of the week, having seen her only when they, and Arcadio's men had been taken to the hospital wing. Excluding those brief sightings, the trio had been too embarrassed to even show their faces in front of Fiore's princess. It seemed, however, their time of hiding from her had come to an end, and she'd sent a messenger herself. We can't put it off much longer, Max said sheepishly. I was still hoping there'd be a way to save face. Dorenbolt said. Maybe she won't be too hard on us, Wendy suggested hopefully. Numerous kingdoms haven't, and for that foolishness, I had nearly gotten my men and I killed. Had it not been for you, there would have been many more lives taken, not just of my squadron but of everyone in this castle. For that reason, I ask humbly, he bowed, his mop of hair remaining erect despite its bushy state, as he cried out without holding back. That I may be given a chance, to fight at your side and repay the favor for this debt that weighs within me. An uneven sloshing of water filled the ears of a terrified observer. Their eyes filled with the shimmering blue of swirling waves, moving unnaturally for simple, flowing streams. It coalesced into a single shape, snaking its way forward. In a rush of motion, it impaled a small figure, thin-bodied, short, flowing blue hair, piercing her heart in seconds. The drilling torrent burst through the other side of the girl, blood mixing in with the liquid, letting her impaled body slip down further. When the water vanished, the body of Wendy Marvell crashed unceremoniously to the ground, unmoving. In a hospital bed, safe in a castle many miles away from where this vision had taken place, the Exceed Charles woke, shaking in fear. A quick look around told Charles everything she needed to know. Whatever that horrible dream had been was not where she was now, but she also wasn't in the Mercurius Castle treasury. Where? What? Placing a pawed hand to her large head, Charles tried to remember everything. The feeling of falling unconscious, preceded only by a jolt of pain so sharp and terrible that she literally could not bear it. It's fine, Charles, the soothing voice of the person most important to Charles filled her ears, relaxing the tension in her body. Wendy Marvell, mercifully whole and hale in Charlie's eyes, was standing at her bedside, gently placing her arms around the Exceed in an embrace. The battle ended a week ago. You've been here, in the Mercurius Castle hospital wing. A week. The Exceed felt confusion, and it showed visibly on her face. Another cursory glance around the bed she sat showed lacrima which had floated around her, sustaining vital functions, but were now at rest. Did we complete the mission, at least? She desperately wanted to believe that dream was nothing more than a nightmare born of worry, rather than a bona fide vision. Her powers had always been unclear. Perhaps this meant nothing at all. Wendy shook her head. No. They got the better of us. The young dragon slayer didn't want to admit that it was shortly after Charles got wounded. She'd been unable to focus on their battle, yet it seemed to show on her face. But we're going to track them down today and correct that mistake. We'll do better this time. See, Charles forced a smile. Right. She tried to sit up, only for Wendy to gently sit her back down. Charles, please, for my sake, stay here and recover a little more. Wendy was hurt to say it, and even more hurt to see the expression on her companion's face. It was beyond upset, it was rejection in a single look, and Wendy knew that outright telling Charles her concern would hurt her even more. However, as Wendy focused on protecting Charles, it would completely upend her entire plan, and she would sacrifice the mission to protect Charles if push came to shove. Charles wanted to protest, but part of her knew that the reason the first go-around with the hoodlums had failed was because of her. If she accompanied them on this next mission, what if that vision came to pass because of her? Would she be responsible for Wendy's death because Wendy had to protect her? The vision of Wendy's crumpled body on the floor, a hole gaping wide where her torso had once been, caused Charles to shake in terror. She'd had visions before, but none quite showed her best friend in such a state. Charles hesitated to form the words. All right, Wendy, I'll rest here. But please, be safe. Whoever you're fighting, there's something more to them than what they seem. I saw. Charles couldn't outright say that what she saw was her best friend's corpse. Something. Please be careful. I will. Wendy nodded, hugging Charles tightly. While you rest, Charles, we'll get this done and I'll come back safe to you. Releasing her Exceed, Wendy turned away quickly, walking towards the door. She was shaking, but her face was hidden properly for her friend, and thus the stream of tears was known only to Wendy. She didn't want to part from Charles, even temporarily, but losing her best friend to these people was something she wouldn't be able to cope with right now. If I lose Charles, I don't know what I'd do. I'm sorry, Charles. Exiting the castle, Wendy had stopped crying, though she was still rubbing her eyes. Dorenbolt, Arcadios, and Max were waiting outside for her. That wasn't easy, was it? Dorenbolt asked. Wendy shook her head. No. I want Charles to be with me. Ever since she hatched, we haven't been apart. But I can't lose her to these people. We'll be back to her, Wendy. Dorenbold placed a hand on the younger woman's shoulders, gripping it tightly. We just need to focus on the goal for now. Right, Wendy nodded firmly. Max, Dorenbold, let's set out. In an effort to combat her misery, Wendy let out a ferocious cry, pumping her fist in the air. Max and Dorenbold rallied behind Wendy, and the group set off, Wendy at the lead. Following her nose, they were sure to find their quarry. Even with Charlie's cryptic warning hanging overhead, Wendy put it in the back of her mind and ran forward. All that mattered was completing the mission and returning home safely. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part, be sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments. Ray What If signing out.